Take your pick, Bryce Young or Will Levis? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can check her out on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. You can also go read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we're doing another Take Your Pick Rookie Edition. We're going to be discussing RB4 among rookies, a late round rookie that maybe you should start to add this offseason. But let's first start with an absolutely wild one. Bryce Young or Will Levis as QB3, Kate?
This is going to sound pretty crazy, but Marcus, just based purely off of what we've seen with two guys that I think have kind of fairly comparable receiving cores, as crazy as it is to say, more impressed with what I've seen by Will Levis. And it's interesting because the box score doesn't necessarily like pop off the page for Will Levis, right? Like in 8 starts, completing just under 59% of his pass attempts, averaging 7.2 yards per attempt. That's fine. 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But what I love the big time plays, the big time throws, 5.7% big time throw rate per PFF, an 11-yard average depth of target. Like this dude's just kind of slinging it. And that's been kind of the I would say the issue for Will Levis, right? He's got arm strength out the wazoo. I don't know if you guys saw like the somebody zoomed in on his biceps like in the last week and shared the picture on social media. His biceps are insane. He's got arm strength like crazy, which, you know, obviously that has forced some inaccuracy issues. He's got the YOLO mentality that like obviously that can yield mistakes and that can be a risky way to play ball. But I do think that based on what we've seen so far, that YOLO mentality can lead to, I think, a little bit more upside than maybe what we're seeing from Bryce Young. Young's average 5.3 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Just hasn't looked. He hasn't looked good. Like he hasn't, and that's not to say it's all on him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you see, you know, that Will Levis, I think, is finding some more success in a relatively comparable situation and looking that much better, it's really hard not to lean Will Levis here.
All right. So if you want someone fun to root for in your dynasty leagues and your fantasy leagues, to me, it's no doubt it's Will Levis for all the reasons.
With upside. With upside.
With upside. He throws the ball deep. He takes off and runs. He's a physical quarterback in a lot of ways. Kate, as I was watching the game against Miami, he's like the perfect Mike Vrabel quarterback. Like Mike Vrabel just wants like a meathead as a quarterback. And this is like perfect. He plays the game exactly like that. However, I'm still taking Bryce Young, which is actually not the way that it is in dynasty leagues right now. Will Levis, as of our December ADP, being drafted as QB 18 overall, Bryce Young going as QB 19. For me, it's all about the investment, right, in the draft capital. Obviously, Bryce Young was the number 1 pick, but the Panthers also traded a fortune to go up and get him. They traded their first-round pick in 2024, likely the number 1 overall pick. They traded DJ Moore. They traded a future second-round pick. Carolina has to make this work. They're going to give him plenty of time. And unfortunately, that just matters when it comes to dynasty value. Like the more opportunities to get that you get, the longer you're going to have dynasty value. Whereas Will Levis was a second-round pick. We see the second-round picks come and go all the time at the quarterback position. I will take Bryce Young because I have a feeling that everything the Panthers do this offseason is going to be with the idea that we need to make Bryce Young look better. We're going to hire an offensive-minded coach that can help him look better. We're going to go out and sign big-name receivers to make him look better. We're going to improve our offensive line. It's why I would lean Bryce Young here, even though Will Levis is so much more fun to watch.
I understand. I think the investment in draft capital that this team made in, just the entire process to get him from a you know financial standpoint, from a draft pick standpoint, like, yes, this team is all freaking in on Bryce Young. And I get that. Like, there's no feasible position that you can consider that, like, okay, this team can move on from Bryce Young just
No,
based on the assets they traded. But again, do I think that, some of those assets that they traded might set them up for failure in their
absolutely. Not a
overall
doubt.
goal to rebuild? Like, that does pose a problem. You trade away the entire farm, including your top wide receiver, to get the quarterback, and suddenly he has nobody to throw to. And my concern is that I'm not sure I trust this organization as a whole to be able to figure out how to rebuild this mess that I get it. You need a franchise quarterback, and they thought Bryce Young was their guy, and they traded the farm to get him. But my concern is, like, is this a good enough organization under this ownership, with this kind of tumultuous atmosphere? Is this going to be a environment that fosters growth from Bryce Young? Do they have the right tools to execute it? And
No,
I don't
no,
know
they
that
don't.
that's the case.
They don't. You're just hoping that something clicks for Bryce Young. I will say, in his defense, and I know this is going to sound bad, but like last week against Atlanta, he did drive them 90, I think it was 92 yards to get the game-winning points and to win that drive. I think over the last few weeks, you've seen flashes, and I'm talking about like one or two a game that at least make you think, okay, if they can get a competent team around him, maybe he can get to be an average quarterback. And I get it, that bar is really low. To me,
What's the
it's
upside for Bryce Young, though? Do
well,
you
that's
think?
the issue. That's the issue because like if he hits his upside, I still don't see him as a QB1. You're probably looking at a high end QB2. That's every week you're hoping for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, like something like that.
And I look at Will Levis, and I think he has legitimate QB1 upside.
Would
If
agree.
if his trajectory went perfectly, Will Levis, I think, has QB1 upside. If Bryce Young's trajectory went perfectly, QB2 upside for me, and that's going to be my tiebreaker.
Yeah, the only thing that I have concern with Levis is that Mike Vrabel likes to play a certain brand of football, and I think everybody kind of knows what I'm referring to, like ball control, play defense, play safe, run the ball, and I just wonder, like, would that limit his potential passing ceiling? Maybe, but if he's going to run like he's running over the last couple of weeks, let's hope that he gets healthy. I know he hurt his ankle against Houston, but that part of it does make me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Uh,
I again, these guys are very close, and they're in such different situations.
yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
you can really play both sides of the field on this one, and probably, I don't know that there are any necessary winners here.
No, both on bad South teams, right? Young in the NFC South, Levis in the AFC South. Both really need to upgrade their offensive lines and their weapons this offseason. We will see who can get that done. Okay, let's move on to a running back 4 discussion because we know who the top 3 guys are, but who is your RB4 in your rookie drafts? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That is $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options available, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. I love to bet on the futures market. It's one of my favorite things. You can get your Steelers right now, I believe, at 10-1 on FanDuel to make the postseason. not a bad bet if you think the Steelers are going to run the table, Kate, over the next 3 games. We'll see. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We wanted to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Kay, let's transition over to running back. We know who the top 3 running backs are. It's Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Devon Achane from the Miami Dolphins. After that, it gets a little tricky. At RB4 right now, we've got Zach Charbonnett. RB5 is Tyjae Spears. Which one would you rather have going forward?
I'm still leaning Zach Charbonnett. And this, from a talent perspective, he wins out for me by a significant chunk. I love his play style. I love the versatility he offers, both, in the screen game and, just his overall ability to generate yards after contact. He's such a fun running back. I love, love, love the talent of Zach Charbonnett. And you know what, Marcus, like I think there's a concern, right? That what are we going to get out of this Seattle Seahawks backfield? And I still have a firm belief that Kenneth Walker, with the style of running he has, obviously he can be tough, but he can, really take it to the house with his overall speed. Zach Charbonnett, I think, has a real opportunity here to be one of those guys, like the guy they trust in between the tackles. And I think the difference in their running styles gives Charbonnett still a clear path to a role within this offense with the Seahawks. Tyjae Spears, you look at the draft capital, you look at the talent, Charbonnett both wins in those marks, at least for me. Tyjae Spears, I'm very curious to get your thoughts on, because you love what we've seen so far from a perspective of opportunity. You look at the team and you look at what this roster is going to do. Derrick Henry's in the final year of his deal. He wants to play for a contender. He's not going to be back next year.
No.
This team is ranked top 12 in rush attempts in 5 of the 6 seasons that Mike Vrabel has been the head coach. Like, you're right. They have a certain mold of offense that Tyjae Spears could be a perfect complement for. But, I wonder from, a long-term health perspective, I still have questions that maybe you heard some more answers for in the pre-draft process. There were a lot of concerns about Tyjae Spears, knee injury,
he doesn't have an
arthritis.
ACL.
Doesn't have an ACL, but there were talks about arthritis and so I don't know if maybe you have more insight as to those reports and their validity than I do, but the rumblings, had me nervous.
The rumblings aren't great, and we'll leave it there. Having said that, I'm still taking Tyjae Spears here for a couple of reasons. The dynasty running back situation is really gross, and it's all about windows, right? Like, how long can this player be a useful fantasy asset that can help me win leagues? And I just wonder with Zach Charbonnett, you look at like the rookie contracts. Kenneth Walker still has 2 years remaining on his deal after this year. He's clearly ahead of Zach Charbonnett. Now, Seattle does love to run the ball a lot, so that helps. But I look at Tyjae Spears, and it's like there's a really good chance that he is the unquestioned starter next year and then the following year, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I think I would just lean Tyjae here because I think he's got the juice. He's already playing, and we know that he can be a really impactful receiver. Now, before the Texans game, 6 receptions against the Dolphins, 4 receptions at the Colts, 4 receptions against the Steelers, 4 against the Buccaneers, 4 against the Colts again. Like, he's just involved in the passing game. And if he can get his workload in the run game up a little bit, which is like, 13 to 16 carries, I think he could be a high-end RB2 as soon as next year. So I would rather take Spears rather than waiting on something to happen in Seattle. Give me Spears for the next 2 years.
So Spears from again, this is kind of another question for me. Obviously, like we said, the draft capital not in his favor though. Third round pick, you'll
It's not
take
bad.
that.
It's not bad.
But my biggest question, because of the fact that we've seen him take on such a significant role as kind of like the 3 down back, is there a chance that they bring in another guy for early down work and we never see this
Yes.
full-time workload and because I think Zach Charbonnett has that chance to walk away with 15 plus carries or 15 plus touches, I'll say, any given week. I don't know that that's the case, just with the way that they've been utilizing him. And of course, take that with a grain of salt because he's playing, with Derrick Henry, who
Sure.
you're not going to play. Yeah, I get it. But my concern just comes is there a chance that he isn't the guy and he's the complimentary guy? And
I think there is,
I
Kate.
think, yeah.
I to be fair, I think there's no doubt in my mind that Tennessee is going to be bringing in a veteran running back to pair with Tyjae Spears. But what you're hoping for is that it's like Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott, like one of those kind of guys that's just so clearly past his prime that it's so obvious to the coaching staff, like we can't take Tyjae Spears off the field. I would get more concerned if I'm trying to think of the Deontay Foreman type that we've seen kind of over the last couple of years, where somebody who just every time he plays gives you a little bit more than you expect. I do think the Titans are going to bring in somebody. You're just hoping that it's somebody pretty washed up so Spears looks significantly better.
All right. I think that's fair. Are
Yeah.
we ever going to agree, Marcus?
Well, this one's not. I'd have no problem if you want to take Zach Charbonnett over Tyjae Spears. I get it. The draft capital does matter. And I think the situation matters. I think Seattle's just set up better to have a more productive offense. But we're talking about RB4 here. So to be fair, we agree on the first 3 running backs. It's just when you get down a little bit. I've had a feeling, though, we are going to agree on this next one. Let's go down the list a little bit further, because every year we have 1 or 2 of these running backs pop that go on day 3 or go on late day 2, and they end up becoming the unquestioned starter the following year. Is Chase Brown the next guy to do that? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? Time to order in with DoorDash. Is it halftime? That's ordering time. 2-minute warning. You got it. That is your cue to order in. Whenever the game clock stops, that's the time to order in with DoorDash. There's no reason to root for your favorite team on an empty stomach. Order on DoorDash and save on all of your football watch party favorites. Order pizza, wings, sodas, burgers, or even just buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. I'm just going to tell you right now, DoorDash is going to be my best friend over the next week with football on basically every single day. Cannot wait to just plop myself on the couch, order some DoorDash. I love ordering pizza from DoorDash. It's my absolute favorite. Right now, you can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. Again, that is 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers. On tomorrow's show, Kate and I are back breaking down Rams Saints. Pretty fun Thursday night football game. Plus, we will get you ready for Week 16 with promotion commotion, so you won't want to miss that. But let's do one more of these, Kate. Take your pick. Chase Brown or Roschon Johnson?
This is super interesting, Marcus, because I think both of these running backs are in a very interesting position where they could take over an entire backfield. Both of these running backs have a ton of talent. Both of these running backs, I think, have, had their moments sparking. And Chase Brown, let's be honest, he has been, turning some heads in recent weeks. We've seen him be relatively, I think, more involved than anybody would have expected. 9 touches in each of the last 3 weeks, 50 plus scrimmage yards in each of those outings. And like, let's be real, I do think that Chase Brown has generally looked a bit more, efficient, spry, healthy, young than Joe Mixon. And, it plays out in the stats, averaging 4.4 yards per carry, 2.62 yards after contact per attempt. That beats out Joe Mixon by a mile. Lots of explosive playmaking ability to be utilized in the screen game. But from my evaluation of these respective players, like the draft capital, not all that different. I kind of lean back into Roschon Johnson, which kind of surprises me. And I don't know from
I really thought we were going to agree on this one, Kate. I really thought we were.
So from an opportunity standpoint, Chase Brown, like I think there's a real chance that Joe Mixon, like they can save, I think, about $4 million next year if they move on from Joe Mixon. I've wondered a bit if Chase Brown's recent involvement has been kind of like testing the waters a little bit, seeing what they have in the depth of their roster. And, I think there's a chance that maybe they move on from Joe Mixon this offseason, but the risk is that they don't. And that is probably the biggest source of concern here. I like, when I look at my prospect evaluations, I loved Roschon Johnson. Like obviously the reason that he was drafted as low as he was, I think, is in part because he was playing behind Bijan Robinson at Texas. Like, you're not handing Roschon Johnson a ton of work in that backfield when you have Bijan Robinson carrying the load and looking like a generational talent. If he had a workload that was, I think, reflective of, a starter's workload, I think we'd be having a different conversation about Roschon. We've seen the team kind of willing to utilize him in passing down situations. And you know what? I think like he's probably been a little underutilized between the tackles. We've seen a lot of that work go to Deontay Foreman, who I wouldn't expect back next year. You do have Khalil Herbert, who's got 1 year left on his rookie deal. But again, just feels like less of an obstacle if we're looking at this in a well-rounded.
Sure.
This one's actually probably, I think, the hardest one that
I
we've
agree.
done today.
First of all, can somebody tell Arthur Smith that Bijan Robinson is generational? That would be really nice for all my fantasy teams. Just please, somebody tell him. This one's close for me, Kate, but this one comes down to your evaluation of Chase Brown. And I think he's a dude. Like the best way for me to describe, like, I think he's a player, right? And you see that like every time he touches the ball. There was a play against Minnesota where Jake Browning threw him just a pass on the sideline that was like 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. They needed to get the first down. He broke a tackle, got 8 yards, boom, converted. That's not a huge play. It's nothing that everybody's going to go post on Twitter about, oh, look how awesome this running back is. But it's those type of plays that remind me of a couple of different players. He reminds me a little bit of Jaylen Warren, who you know really well, where like every time he touches the ball, something really good happens. And I think there's a chance that that's the most likely situation where he becomes the number 2 guy in Cincinnati. The Bengals keep Joe Mixon as kind of the big power back, and Chase Brown comes in for 12 to 14 plays a game and gives you a little bit of juice. I think that's probably the most realistic situation. And Jaylen Warren still has some fantasy value that way, and I think Chase Brown would as well. I also wouldn't be surprised if this turns into a Tony Pollard situation where he's just so clearly better than Joe Mixon. And by year 2, he's the guy that you're making sure you get 16 to 17 touches a game because he gives more juice to the offense. And I think with T. Higgins potentially moving on, maybe that's somebody that Joe Burrow just targets a bunch of the passing game to give them a little bit more playmaking. I see a young Austin Eckler and Chase Brown, and he's somebody that I just want to stash on as many as my dynasty leagues as I can.
I think that's totally fair. And maybe this is one of these situations where I do think from a situation standpoint, you look at these running backs in fairly comparable situations. So maybe that is the moment you go back to your initial impression, your initial scouting reports of these players. Now, I loved Roschon Johnson,
We both
and
did. We both did.
if we had him maybe in a different offense, a better offense, we might be a little bit more excited about him. But going back to like his overall prospect evaluation, like just so solid in breaking tackles, like just a tough runner. And then I wasn't necessarily expecting him to have a huge role as a receiver. I had him evaluated as more of like a power back, a power type runner that can generate yards after contact and really make a difference there. And I wasn't even thinking about this receiving work. And then you see him come into the Bears offense and trust him with some of that work, which I think shows me that the Bears really think he can be a complete running back. And maybe that's also the case for Chase, the case for Chase. But
I love it.
There's I think a lot to like about both of these guys. So maybe it comes down to which of them can you get cheaper in your dynasty leagues?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because actually you can get both of them pretty cheap right now. As of our December ADP, Roschon Johnson RB28, Chase Brown RB50. Now, of course, Chase Brown, after performing pretty well over the last couple of weeks, his price is going to go way up. But we've seen some recent trades over the last 2 days to show you can get him pretty cheap, like Chase Brown for Ezekiel Elliott. We're taking the Chase Brown side all day.
Heck yeah.
Chase Brown, Zach Moss, and Tyler Conklin for Terry McLaurin. It's a little closer, but you can get him for nothing. I actually think Kate, the best way to do this is just go out and get both of them. These are really good dart throws to stash on your dynasty rosters. I would have no problem at all just going out and buying both of these players this offseason.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out our YouTube channel. We post videos every single day over there. We are free and available on all podcast platforms. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. Go check out her work at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow breaking down Saints Rams on Thursday Night Football. Enjoy, everybody.